In this video, I will be discussing the current issue of overexpansion of mental disorders. And I'll note that this video will be quite short for this topic because we will spend a lot more time when we discuss the DSM in a future week. Essentially, what this current controversy is getting at is that there has been a large increase in the size and the scope of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM. So the original DSM from 1952 had just over 100 descriptive diagnoses. And our most recent version, which is the DSM-5 text revision from 2022, has over 400 different diagnoses, and each one of those has specific symptom checklists. So the DSM has evolved quite a bit over time. And so why is the DSM expanded, and why do we talk about expanding it even more? Part of it is that we want to have a system of diagnoses that prevent people from falling through the cracks. So we don't want there to be a person who needs services, would benefit from mental health treatment, but doesn't meet criteria for any diagnosis because it doesn't exist. And so the goal is to create a system of diagnoses that cover everybody, that help us describe any sort of behavioral health problem across people. And so over time, disorders are usually expanded in two different ways. So first, there can just be the introduction of a whole new disorder that didn't exist before that captures experiences that were once considered normal. So some recent examples that we'll go into more detail when we discuss the DSM, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which refers to symptoms that are similar to a major depressive episode, but that only correspond with the menstrual cycle. There's also binge eating disorder, which did not exist in previous editions. And the only disorder that was added in 2022 is prolonged grief disorder, which has a lot of controversy because grief covers a lot of, cultural and social norms. And so to kind of define what grief is in order to define what prolonged grief is has been an interesting area of controversy. A second way that disorders can be expanded is to, quote unquote, lower the bar for disorders that already exist. So some recent changes were shifting the requirement to get a diagnosis of ADHD. It used to be that symptoms had to start by age 7, but now they made it age 12. And so that opens it up so that more people might be able to meet the criteria for ADHD. And there could be good reasons to do this. So for this particular example, a lot of research shows that girls with ADHD have a later age of onset, or it might not be noticed until they get to middle school or until academics get more difficult. So based on, gender, personality type, other situations, ADHD symptoms might not be that noticeable before the age of 7. Another example is reducing the required frequency of binges in bulimia nervosa from twice a week to once a week. So this, again, is kind of making it easier for somebody to meet the criteria for this diagnosis because it's reduced the requirement for that criteria. So these are just some examples of how mental disorders have been expanded. There has been a lot of critique of expanding mental disorders, however. Alan Francis is a psychiatrist who used to sit on the board of the DSM, and then he left because he did not like how things were being managed. And I think his quote here is a good summary of a lot of the criticisms of expanding. So he says that there has been no real epidemic of mental illness, just a much looser definition of sickness, making it harder for people to be considered well. The people remain the same. The diagnostic labels have changed and are too elastic. Problems that used to be an expected and tolerated part of life are now diagnosed and treated as mental disorder. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts if you want to pause the video here and comment. I think this sums up a lot of the critique is saying that, a lot of human difficulties are just part of life, and that doesn't mean that everything has to be in the DSM. Other criticisms. Some people say that overdiagnosis might lead people to get treatment that they don't need. So if it becomes easier to meet the criteria for a diagnosis, it also becomes easier for somebody to enter treatment. And maybe this is opening it up too much so that we have people who don't need treatment. And there can be negative effects of treatment. So for medications, we have side effects. So medication can help people with a lot of things, but there are side effects. So if it's not necessary, then that can add this negative effect to someone's life. Another is this idea that psychotherapy can undermine a person's existing ability to cope. So most of us have built-in coping skills and can deal with day-to-day challenges in life. But if some of those day-to-day challenges in life become pathologized, become labeled in the DSM, then it might send the message that people need to change, that they can't actually cope with these challenges. Second, people have noted the influence of the pharmaceutical industry. So drug companies do have a stake in the way that mental disorders are defined. So it's been noted that DSM authors on previous editions and current editions have been on the payroll of pharma companies. And so this brings the question of, is there a bias in why we need more diagnoses? Why are certain diagnoses getting more attention? So in summary, some people say there's no real epidemic of mental illness, that it's just kind of a social construction. It's how we talk about mental illness. Some people say that the DSM is overly extending the scope of mental disorders into normal human experiences. Some people might go as far as say there's no validity to the concept of mental disorders, that these are human creations. There are also the critique that we are lowering the bar, that we're making it too easy to meet criteria for certain diagnoses, and potentially that this could all lead to overtreatment. So I'm going to stop here for this topic, but we'll dive much deeper into this topic in a future week.